So is the point of this that we are still back to where you have always been, which is we need to organize, and by we I mean the unions need to organize, and people need to have to do whatever they can. I mean, I guess I'm curious from the perspective, okay, I got my podcast. I have a pretty good notion of what I can do to help in this situation. But if I'm out there and I'm listening to this and I'm not a member of the union, and if I'm a member of a union, I can go and I can say to my union leadership, or I can be the union leadership, hey, let's focus on organizing as opposed to advocating or whatnot. But what if I'm not in a union and I don't have a podcast? What can I do to support that worker? How can I empower workers, broadly speaking?
Yeah, great question. I think two things. One is you can do just what you, Sam, are doing, right? But everyone can do this, which is actually defend and support the existing unions. That's one thing. But secondly, support and try and force the question. Like in the article I wrote about Me Too, here's a really important example. Like we have this, burgeoning, I'm not sure I'm going to call it a women's movement. I'm not ready to say that. But we have a lot of activity happening by a lot of women, starting with last year's Women's March, and I'm getting ready to go to my second year Women's March, but it's like the women's movement, so-called, whatever that means, all the women's groups, every woman who shows up to the giant marches that we're doing, like if every one of those women understood unbreakable class solidarity and began to demand that there's an expansion of unions in this country, that that's actually the solution to most of the crises that women are facing in this country, that would be a huge breakthrough. And we don't see that right now, Sam. Like the national, the groups that are identified as the national women's groups in this country are not throwing down for the expansion of trade unions. They are not. And ironically, I did a radio show just before the Women's March last year out here in California, on an NPR station out here, and we were talking about, it was like right after the inauguration, and I was on to talk about life under Trump, and they brought in someone who was, I'm not going to name it, but they brought in one of the 6 organizers from the National Women's March. It hadn't happened yet, and at one point they said, so there's 2 of us on the show, and at one point they said, well, Jane, what do you think about the Women's March? You're going to go, da-da-da. And I said, well, yeah, but let me be clear about something. The largest organization of women in this country right now is called trade unions. We are actually the largest women's organization in the country. So are the people at the Women's March calling for a mass expansion of trade unions? Like, do middle-class white women, which is who dominates a lot of the Wave 2 feminist organizations in this country, do they understand that the most important thing that has to happen is that women get unions? And there was dead silence on the phone, and the person on the phone actually said, that's actually not my topic. And I almost fell off the chair in the radio station. Like, that's not my topic? Like, what is a women's movement that doesn't understand that working class women have no defense in the workplace without a union? So the women's movement needs to get behind, like that's part of my argument in the Me Too story I wrote. The women's movement needs to really think about the power analysis in this country. And, Time's Up is lovely. And I'm glad they're raising money for lawsuits, but lawsuits are not a strategy. Lawsuits are not building power. It's like telling low-wage workers, there's no more pensions in America, but we'll set up a 401k and you can put your extra money in. Right. They don't have a penny to put into it. It's like litigation is not a strategy, and that's all Time's Up is coming up with right now. There was no mention at the Golden Globes of the word union. Union. Like it didn't even come up in the conversation, and I find that massively disturbing.
Well, I mean, and we should just tell people, Time's Up is the I guess the Hollywood response to helping all the women who are basically either organized in these unions or should be working in restaurants or service sector or whatnot that don't get the don't have access to,
that don't have unions. That's the whole point. They're the alt labor movement, and they're going to be subject to Murphy Oil when Murphy Oil is ruled on. So that's going to be a big blow. But there's never going to be enough money in the world raised by Hollywood women to quote unquote protect and legally defend low-wage women.
Okay, so we have a very concrete challenge here, right? I mean, do you approach this by by getting off that interview and, sending an email to those 6 organizers of the Women's March and saying, hey, look, let me sit down with you and talk to you about why your biggest power you can get 1 million people out there. You can get to 3 million women to come out there, but then they're just going to disperse. The key is to bring in a system that will actually keep them in some way interconnected. Is that what happens?
That's certainly one, but it's just an example for me of sort of how fractured our quote unquote progressive movement is right now, right? That there are people making all sorts of demands without ever addressing the class question, which I call like the elephant in the room, which is class and unions. And so, for example, I suggested that, like in my article about Me Too and in these Times last week, that like Emily's List, like that women should be demanding that every single political action committee that's out there raising tons of money from women should literally use support for the expansion of trade union rights as a crucial litmus test for political action money and endorsements. Like that would be concrete and huge in this country if all the so-called progressive PACs, if the climate change PACs, Tom Steyer's work, whatever, there's all these political action campaigns out there. And if all of them said, we get it. Actually, the thing that we mostly need to do in this country is rebuild working class power through trade unions. That's what offers up. That kind of empowerment is what offers up real power in the long term for America's workers, whether they're women or not. That'd be a sea change, and we don't have all the women's. I don't think we have any political action women's group saying support for the expansion of trade union rights is crucial to whether or not you get our money.
Is that because, the analogy, it seems to me, is like every time Democrats get in power, they have the opportunity to do something like card check or whatever it is that they don't do that would, I think inarguably increase their ability to get reelected, although they would have to maybe give up some control and some power. And it seems to me that's sort of the problem that exists when you talk about those groups as well, that it's not my issue. I don't want to.
Well, you just nailed it. The idea that it's not my issue is what is wrong with the so-called progressive movement in this country. Like, we can't amass the amount of power that we need. Part of the problem is that we don't talk a lot about power. We don't talk a lot about power structure analysis, because if you start to really get down to like, how will we rebuild mass-based power that's capable of throwing Trump, and not just, Trump is just a figurehead, of challenging the forces that put Trump into power. That's what I address in their shortcuts, is like the 45-year buildup of right-wing forces throughout the country at the grassroots level, very strategically. Like, they're doing a lot of what I'm talking about right now. And we began to hire lawyers and do the advocacy approach, right? So we've let our base wither while the rights base has grown. So when you said it's not my issue, one of the most pitch-perfect examples for me, and this would affect a lot of women. This would be a challenging, important conversation for a lot of women in this country to have, is like the growth of charter schools, for example, as like a wedge issue in the Democratic so-called alliance, right? Democratic Party, types. There are tons of people who say, teachers' unions are the problem. Now, again, they're not just saying that for no reason. They're not waiting for Superman. We got a multi-million-dollar funded operation here. But, like, at the end of the day, we have to grapple with those issues at the local level in our electoral coalitions, at our national marches, because it's not my issue is not going to challenge the forces that are attacking women, the planet, climate, black people, jailing people, deportation. Oh, immigrants, I talk about 350,000 Salvadorans are going to be sent home, to a repressive government. Like, all of these issues require unbreakable class solidarity, and they require our movement to get over the idea that, quote unquote, this is not my issue. Building power has to be the movement's issue, and building power has a building block called trade unions, among other things.
Well, what is the percentage of women that make up the two major teachers' unions in this country? Is it
Oh, it's overwhelming.
I mean, it's got to be over
couldn't
80%, right? I mean, I would think 75%. I mean,
but also healthcare unions, like nurses unions. You know, a lot of the sectors that are growing. That's part of the argument I keep making. We do have economic sectors that are growing, that are female heavy. Healthcare is a growing sector in this country. No matter what they do, they can't build a robot who can do what most human workers are doing in hospitals and healthcare settings, and same with education. So, you look at those two sectors where they're not going to shrink anytime soon, and in fact, they are growing, given the aging population of healthcare. It's overwhelmingly female workers, and so the idea that there's anything but a union that's going to enable a new generation of mostly women workers to sort of like rise into the power structure. I have been looking for 53 years for shortcuts, and I haven't found them, which is why my book is called No Shortcuts.
Hi, folks. Sam Seder here. We still need your help on our Patreon page. YouTube ads have come back, but not nearly as much as we had before. So if you can help us out, any little bit helps. Head over to our Patreon page right at this URL, and you'll help us keep helping you by making videos